Again, my name's Greg Dunn. I'm the greenhouse manager at Trillium Haven Farm. Trillium Haven Farm is in Jenison, Michigan. It's about a 50-acre farm. We have about 30 acres under cultivation. We grow produce. We're a community-supported agriculture farm, which is a business model, relatively new, where people ahead of time will purchase shares in the farm. So we get money up front to pay for our seeds and pay for our labor and get the farm going. And then throughout the growing season, which for us is about the first week of June to the last week of October, all the members receive a share of what's in season for that week. So it's a way for people to be connected with a local farm, to learn to eat seasonally, to be able to eat locally, to support local agricultural economies and communities. And it can be a great deal of fun and a great challenge when you have all of these unusual vegetables coming your way and you've never heard of before. And you're like, what do I do with this? And what do I do with these vegetables? So.
Could I have you pull the mic off there because this one doesn't seem to be working?
Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah. The video will be a problem.
Oh, the video mic. All right.
Where is the farm?
The farm is in Jenison, Michigan.
Technicality.
See, mute.
This is for mine, but I think she wants.
Oh, all right. Can you hear? Is that better? All right. The farm is in Jenison, Michigan. Near, if you know where Maplewood Lake is, we're just on the other side of Maplewood Lake. So it's a former Grand River floodplain. So it's on that great muck Michigan soil, which is great for growing produce. Today we're going to talk about hardy vegetables, winter hardy vegetables. And before we do that, we'll talk about, get a couple terms in our heads so we know where we are with hardy vegetables and what that means. And the couple things to keep in mind are they're sort of tender vegetables, and then they're hardy vegetables. And then there are annuals and perennials. And you can have these in all sorts of combinations. You can have some perennials that are tender, that are hardy, some annuals that are more tender and more hardy. An annual vegetable, as you probably know, is something that you plant once a year. It grows throughout that growing season. At the end of the season, it dies. It won't come back the next year. A perennial is something that you'll plant, and it will come back year after year, given the right growing conditions. So a tomato is an annual. Basil is an annual. Oregano is a perennial. Asparagus is a perennial. Within those categories, plants can be tender or hardy, and that has to do with the amount of cold that they can tolerate and if they can tolerate light frost. Basil is a tender annual, so that's something that will simply die in the cold and will die if it frosts. Peppers, peppers have nights that are below 50 degrees, they will actually stop growing for a week. It takes them a week to recover from that shock of the cold, so they're tender. Hardy vegetables are ones that will be able to tolerate some light frost. They'll be able to grow in the cold, and many of them, in fact, thrive in the cold and taste best in the cold. Brussels sprouts are about the classic example of a hardy annual vegetable that does its best in the fall when it's cool. And then we need to talk about planting dates. And as a rough rule of thumb, you can think of Mother's Day, Memorial Day, and Father's Day. And these are the sort of the rough dates around which, in our climate, in our hardiness zone, where the weather breaks for certain kinds of vegetables. Memorial Day is a pretty safe bet around here for our final frost date. So if you have anything to plant out that will be struck by frost, you want to wait, if you want to be sure of it, you want to wait until after Memorial Day. But you want to get all of that in before Father's Day, because in addition to the final frost, we have to look ahead to the first frost of the next fall. And you want to give plants plenty of time to mature, to grow, to bear fruit, and to be harvested before they are struck by the cold weather. So Father's Day is the date that you should shoot for to have your entire garden planted. And we're going to talk about the time between Mother's Day and Memorial Day, and that's when we can plant hardy vegetables. And in fact, there are a few things we can plant before Mother's Day, which is sort of in the category of as soon as the garden soil can be worked. And that's a rough estimate. It'll vary from year to year. It'll vary from garden to garden. But that means the soil's not frozen, the soil's not ice cold, the soil is not overly damp. And that's a judgment call on your part. Some rules of thumbs, they say if the forsythia will bloom when the soil reaches a certain temperature that it's safe to plant peas, for example. So if you see the forsythia blooming, you can plant your peas. You can be assured that the soil is warm enough for those seeds to germinate, because the forsythia only blooms when the soil reaches that temperature. You know, you don't want your soil to be muddy and mucky. You don't want it to clump together. You don't want the seeds to rot as soon as you plant them in the ground. You want the soil to be sort of crumbly. You want it to be light. And that's a feel thing that you'll have to learn, and you'll see it. I think, you know, if it's not, you know, you can squeeze water out of it. It probably needs to dry out some. So, if it's dust, you probably need to water it. So before Mother's Day up to Memorial Day, what can you plant? Are there any questions on that, by the way? Tender hardy, annuals, perennials, and the planting schedule. Anyone have any questions on that? Excellent. One of the first things you can plant, and it's the first thing on your sheet, is something called green garlic. How many people have heard of green garlic? That's cool, because I can tell you about green garlic, because green garlic is a fun plant. Green garlic is the early growth of the garlic plant. Typically, you will plant your seed garlic cloves in the fall. They'll overwinter. We were talking about this earlier. And then as soon as it's warm enough in the spring, they'll begin to sprout, grow throughout the summer. The tops will die back. You can dig up the big garlic heads with the beautiful garlic cloves in them. And they can be cured and stored. That's what you would buy in the grocery store when you think of garlic. At the farm, our garlic we planted it last fall, and it's already about a foot tall. It's already growing right now. You can also, when the plant is about that tall, harvest the entire plant. It'll look a lot like a scallion. It'll have a little bulb at the end of it, greens at the top, and it'll look just like a scallion and have a mild garlic flavor. And it's something you can plant right now. In a month you can harvest it, and it's one of the first great greens that you can add into your diet from your garden. What you want to do is, oftentimes we'll just get, like this is from Costco, we'll buy garlic heads from the store that are organic. And the reason you want to use organic garlic for this is that conventional garlic is sprayed with a chemical that prevents it from sprouting. So if you sprout conventional garlic, it's just going to sit in the ground and not sprout. So you want it to sprout in this case. And you can take the heads, peel back the papers, take the individual cloves, plant them in the ground. I have plant them about 2 inches deep. You can do 4 inches in every direction. And if you're planting in garden beds, you could fill your bed with these little cloves of garlic. They don't need a great deal of room. They will sprout, they will grow. When they look like scallions, you pull them out of the garden. You eat the bulbs, you eat the tops. They taste like garlic, a little bit milder. And you can put them in all kinds of cooking where you would otherwise put cloves of garlic or green onions or or plants such as that, onions. It's a fun plant, and it's something that we can do right now.
And it only takes about a month, you said?
I think it takes about a month, given conditions. I'm guessing a little bit on that. So, but it doesn't take long. It's very quick.
How do you get the bulbs that you bought at Costco? I mean, how do you grow those in your own garden?
Oh, to grow, if you were to grow regular garlic,
Right.
to grow regular garlic, you would plant the cloves in the fall. Single cloves. And you'd plant them on about a 8 to 12-inch spacing. So in a 3-foot bed, you could kind of do 3 rows, a foot apart in the row. They'll overwinter. They'll begin to grow in the spring. You'll see shoots that come up about this time. They'll grow into large plants, sort of large. They almost look like leeks, if you've ever seen a leek growing. The tops will die back. When the tops have died back, you can go through and with a garden fork dig up the plants, and you'll find the cloves. So, and then there's a process for curing them, which is basically letting them cure in sort of a warm, dry place, like an enclosed porch, and then they're ready to store. So,
Do you hang them with the greens?
you can do that. You can hang them. There's a way, especially with soft neck garlic, which has a soft stem. There's a traditional way of braiding that together and hanging it up in your pantry. So green garlic, and it does. Another thing we can plant right now, although it can be a little dicey if the weather gets wet like it is now, that they may rot in the ground, are peas. Peas can be planted early. And the best way to plant peas, I've got some peas here. Oh, there are 3 kinds of peas. There are the snow peas, which are sort of the small pods that you would use in stir fries. There are the snap peas that have a little bit thicker pods that you would break up and eat pods and pea together. And then there are shelling peas, which have the real thin pods, the sort of the classic peas. The pod is inedible. You would eat the pea. They are. It's best to direct sow them in the ground rather than try to transplant them. You really can't buy pea plants, which is fine because peas are very easy to sow. These are what pea seeds look like.
What kind of peas are those?
These are shelling peas. So, and yeah, they look like little dried up peas.
Yes, they do.
And what you'll do is you'll what do I have here? Depending on the variety you have, if you have like a bush variety, a low-growing bush variety, and the catalog will tell you what that means. It means it has a low habit. It won't need a trellis to grow on. You can plant them two inches in all directions in a bed up to 3 feet wide. So you could plant, if you have a low-growing pea that doesn't need to be trellised or grow on a support, you could just plant a big bed of them, and they'll sprout and they'll grow and they'll produce little peas, and you'll pick them and you'll eat them in the garden as they are harvested because they are just absolutely wonderful fresh. When you harvest them, it is, depending on the kind, you know, you want to get for a snow pea, you want a nice sized pod. For the shelling and snap peas, you kind of want to feel in the pod to see that the peas have matured and have filled out nicely in the pod. And then you pick them. And it's important to pick them. If you let them go too long, the sugars in the pea will convert to starches and not taste very good. And it's important to keep them picked, because the more you pick them, the more they'll produce. If you let the peas produce the seeds, their job is done, and they will not produce any more peas for you. So, yes?
Well, what does that look like when the peas go to seed? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the pods will be thick, leathery. The peas will taste very starchy. they'll start to dry out, and the peas will start to look more like this than delicious peas that you would want to eat.
Do you worry about, Trey, do you worry about whether or not you're buying organic seeds or pesticide-free seeds or for the seed itself?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. There are many varieties we like to grow that do not come organic. Organic seeds sometimes can be very expensive, so sometimes there's an economic cost involved. Personally, I think you want to stay away from genetically modified seeds because those trouble me, and that's a whole other conversation. So there are a few seed catalogs that we at the farm sort of rely on. I have some in the resources. Johnny's is a great source for seeds. A lot of the local and small market growers buy their seeds through Johnny's. If you're interested in organic seeds, there's a company called High Mowing Organic Seeds, and they grow all organic seeds. And they're a very good, reputable company. So.
Would you still consider them organic peas if they weren't from organic seeds?
I'm really more concerned about how you grow the food. So if you take seeds and use organic methods,
Got it.
you know, I mean, the term organic is actually a legal term, and one that we're at the farm actually not permitted to use because of the regulations, because we're not certified organic. We're not, to be certified, a certifying organization will come and inspect your farm and make sure that you're following organic practices to the letter. There's an immense amount of paperwork. And for us, it's more important that we're local than that we're organic. You know, and if you have a question about our practices, you can come out to our farm and you can see how we grow things, and it, in a way, becomes our own kind of certification. So.
Organics is also a somewhat misused term, is it not?
It can be.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah, it can be. So.
Have you ever, or would you recommend starting peas early indoor?
I would not. Peas do not like to have their roots disturbed. So.
I found one technique, and I thought it was very clever. They had used old gutters, laid the dirt in the gutters, sprouted their seeds, and so when they needed to put them out in the garden, they had already made a trench, and then they just shoveled them. You just
Wow, that's very clever.
And you laid them all out, they were, barely
Yeah.
moved.
Usually, at the farm, when we are starting things indoors, it's for crops that require a longer growing season than Michigan can provide. Like there are some winter squash varieties that require 100, 120 days to come to maturity, and in a bad year, we don't have that here. You know, so tomatoes you want to start so that they're established and growing, and you can harvest tomatoes longer. For things like peas, you don't really need to do that because they'll sprout, like I say, in the cold. We planted peas last week, and we'll look forward to peas in, I think, early June.
Planted peas last week?
We did. I know, it was a little bold. I don't know what they'll do with all this rain. Yeah.
Sprouts have a long growing season too, don't they?
I'm sorry?
Brussels sprouts have a long
They
growing
do,
season.
yeah. If you have, that is for a bush variety. If you do have a kind of pea that's going to climb, you want to do that in a row. You'll maybe carve out a furrow, plant them a couple inches apart along the base of a trellis. They'll grow up a trellis. And a trellis can be anything as unfancy as a piece of chicken wire staked into the ground, or you can come up with more elaborate systems, or stakes with twine strung between them. The peas won't be picky in that regard. So peas, something you can plant as soon as the soil dries out now.
I planted peas last year not knowing that they would need a trellis because I don't know anything about vegetables at all, and I don't eat peas. But I bought a bit of some seed, and that's exactly what I did. They started growing, and they looked all viney, and I was like, uh-oh, I guess I need a trellis. So I did that. I just took some twigs out of our woods and put string on, and
They were happy, right?
they were happy,
Yeah.
and now we eat peas.
So those are peas. Another thing that we can plant right now are fava beans, or broad beans. I prefer to call them broad beans because fava beans reminds me of that creepy movie, right? You know, Silence of the Lambs. I just call them broad beans. Nobody else in the world calls them broad beans except the English, but fava beans are, they're similar to lima beans except they taste good, which is kind of mean to lima beans, but their advantage is that they can be planted, again, very early. They grow on very poor soil. Most of these will want full sun. So here are the fava beans. They,
Oh, big seed.
big, and this is the beans will look about that large when you harvest them. They'll be big pods up to, I don't know, it's between 6 and 8 inches long. You'll plant them a couple inches deep.
What's the best way to make those? Because I had trouble with those last
There's a
year.
trick to them.
I know.
There's a trick to them.
It's kind of tricky.
Let's see, what do I say? 2 inches deep, about 12 inches apart. The plants do get tall. They'll get about chest high. So yeah, and they're fairly indestructible. They grow on poor soil. They tolerate all kinds of conditions. The trick to them is that when you harvest the bean, they're in a pod, so you have to split the pod open, and then each bean is covered in its own kind of pod, a little shell inside of it. So you need to parboil the beans first, pinch them out of that case, and then cook them from there.
That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of it is a lot of work, but it is worth it. So they,
You have to have a lot of them.
you do.
Like last year, it seemed like I got, a handful, and I went through all that, and then I ended up with just like this little handful of really good beans that I didn't share with anybody. It was only this one. But they were good.
Yeah. They do not require a trellis. Yeah, these are a real low maintenance kind of plant in a lot of ways, which is an advantage of them. So, I'm sorry? That is a great question. Deer have not eaten ours, and deer have eaten many of our other things. So, but I don't know what deer are like where you live. So.
Everything I grow. On the peas and the fava beans. And
Yes.
so forth, the green garlic, you said in about a month.
Yeah.
You can harvest, but the peas and the beans, we plant those now, and when do we start harvesting?
Well, those will be ready, I believe, in June. June is a good is the time when we expect. I think in the farm, right? That's when you pick peas early June. So, and it depends on the variety. When you look in your seed catalog, they'll have a number of days to harvest. And there are some varieties that will bear earlier than others. And certain types will bear earlier than others. A good strategy is to pick 3 different varieties. And one will bear early, one will bear a little bit later, one will bear a little bit later than that. And you can sort of extend your pea season, your pea harvest over a longer period by using different kinds of varieties or staggering the planting of a single variety, plant them a week or 2 weeks apart, and they'll bear that much longer. They don't like heat, so at a certain point the peas are going to peter out. And you'll want to tear them out and put something in, maybe like a short growing salad crop or radishes or something like that. So, any questions about yeah?
Back to the green garlic, it reminded me of what appears to be wild chives growing in our on our lot. And then I could snip some, and it smells oniony, and I believe it's onion grass.
Oh.
But I don't think it's wild growth, because I don't recall ever seeing it bloom. But yeah, I don't know if you have it growing on your property, but I clipped it and I
Yeah,
froze it.
Yeah, chives are, and I'll talk about chives a little bit later. I'm gonna have to pick up my pacer a little bit, but chives are, you can't get rid of chives. If you plant chives, you and your children and your children's children will have chives until the end of time.
Mine are huge already.
Yeah. Any questions about, you had one question?
One quick one, beans, not these kind, but a yellow pole bean, particularly a Kentucky Wonder Wax.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they so hard to find the seed? I can't find any.
Mm.
We grew them last year with super success.
Is that an heirloom variety?
Yes. And I could not find them. We have looked everywhere.
Kentucky Wonder or Kentucky?
Kentucky Wonder Wax yellow pole beans.
I think they're actually in this catalog. Another great catalog source for heirloom seeds, which are old varieties of vegetables, and that's another resource on there, the Seed Savers Exchange, and they're out of Iowa, and their whole business is to continue to curate and supervise and preserve all of these old-fashioned varieties of vegetables that, for one reason or another, are not grown commercially, and if things are not grown commercially, they tend to disappear. So they're preserving these old varieties. And so you can find a lot of really great, interesting, unusual vegetables in that catalog. Now those are things, the green garlic, the peas, and the broad beans are things that we can plant before Mother's Day. Say, if we're lucky, mid-April to Mother's Day. Between Mother's Day and Memorial Day, our options increase even greater. And that is with the, I'm going to skip down here to the brassica family. With the brassica family, these are all vegetables that are related, and they include kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. They include Brussels sprouts, collards, some of the mustard greens. There's some Asian greens. They're just a whole host of brassica or cold crops that you can grow, and they are cold hardy. And really want to be planted between Mother's Day and Memorial Day. They don't like the heat. They like to grow when it's cool. It's best, I think, for the brassicas to purchase plants. I don't think you want to direct seed most of these things. You want to plant out seedlings. You can grow seedlings yourself and start your own seeds, but that's a whole nother class on how to do that. If you want to just grow a few vegetables, it's often just more efficient to go to a local, reputable, responsible grower and buy plants. I'm glad you asked that question. And we actually are a local grower of, in fact, certified organic. That's one part of our operation that is certified organic. And we sell vegetable plants, vegetable seedlings. This is a heirloom cauliflower plant. And most brassicas, when they're this size, look the same. This is a cabbage plant. They're pretty indistinguishable. We do sell Brussels sprout plants.
I can't find them anywhere. Of course, I was looking at them.
So you can pass those around. You want to look for plants that have good green color, that are disease-free, that are insect-free. Oftentimes the best way to do that is to go to a local source. Oftentimes you go to the larger big box store, garden centers. They're dealing in a lot of different kinds of plants. The staff may or may not be terribly educated or interested on vegetable plants. So that's why I recommend going to a local grower where their knowledge might be a little more high. Also, the farmer's market will have vegetable plants for sale starting the last week of April. Trillium Haven Farm will have a booth at the farmer's market starting then. We'll be there till probably Father's Day. That's right. Yep, the Fulton Street Farmer's Market.
You guys are there?
We are.
Okay.
So
See you there.
Is the Napa cabbage part of this family, or is that different?
it is, the Napa cabbage is a part of that family. And that could be planted now as well. So.
Can you right now plant these seedlings out in the garden?
I would wait until Mother's Day.
A little bit longer.
A little bit longer yet. They will.
But you could plant seed out now in the cold crops, right?
You could do that. I believe you could. It depends on the soil temperature, if the soil is warm enough to germinate. So.
Well, 40, 45 degrees will do.
Yeah, yeah. Yes?
Just wondering if you know when those plants were started from seed. Do you have a clue on
Yeah,
that?
how old are those?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. We started those mid-March. Early to mid-March, I believe, is when that particular.
That's a month old.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I started mine. Mine are nothing like that.
Mine aren't either.
Well, in your greenhouses, you have control temperature, control humidity, control everything though, right?
Mainly temperature. Yeah.
More so than humidity?
The humidity is we control the humidity through just venting the house.
What's ideal temperature in your greenhouse for growing those?
Oh, those should grow a little bit cooler. I think we put those at about 60. So
And if it's too hot, do they get long and leggy?
if it's too hot, they'll grow very quickly. Yeah. So for these plants, you want to plant them about that have 18 inches apart. I'll keep passing. So if you have you'll dig your planting hole, you'll gently take that out of the pot, you'll put it in the soil so that the soil level is right about where the soil level is on the pot. You don't want to bury it too deeply. And wait. Any questions about the cole crops, the brassica family?
We've got 100 of them.
I guess that's just, how many, I guess, heads of cauliflower or broccoli would you get with a plant like that?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of these are one-shots. Cauliflower, you'll get one head. Cabbages, you'll get one head. Broccoli, depending on the variety, you'll get one head, and then it'll send out side shoots, and you'll get little florets. Things like kale. Does anybody grow, eat, enjoy kale? Kale is a great plant. If you're not growing it, you should grow it. It looks an awful lot like this. It continues to look like this, but larger when it grows, and you harvest just individual leaves. And you can harvest a kale plant pretty much all season. Throughout the summer, throughout the fall. If you protect it from the winter, you can harvest into the winter. When it gets really cold, they fail.
Steam the leaves?
Hmm?
Steam the leaves to cook them?
You do want to cook them. You want to stem them, steam them, saute them.
Like spinach?
Like spinach, but they're a little bit heavier so that you'll cook them a little bit longer. So.
With cauliflower, how do you know when that's ready? Because I printed that last year and it waited for too long.
Oh. Often with cauliflower, you need to, depending on the variety, you'll have to blanch the leaves, or you blanch the heads, and you'll do that by taking the outer leaves, wrapping them around the head, and tying them together with twine. And that keeps the head nice and white. And you want to pick it, and this is true with broccoli, when it's still firm. You know, there's a point where it grows and it's still firm, and then at a certain point it's going to start loosening up and opening up. And when it starts to do that, it's starting to go. So you want to. Yep. You can sort of pull the leaves apart and peek in, and you can see how it's doing it. Go in and feel it. You can sort of feel it too. You'll learn how to go by feel.
Last year, my cauliflower, the heads got size of a quarter, maybe, and the plants were huge, like 2-3 feet tall. But the heads, they just were tiny. Any ideas?
That could potentially be a nutrient problem. If you have, I believe, if you have too much nitrogen in your soil, and this holds true for a lot of plants, it will grow lots and lots of foliage, but very little fruit.
You need more potassium?
So you need to adjust your soil some way. So. Any other questions about the brassica family? The other thing to plant, and you can plant pretty quickly, and if you're tricky, you can even beat this Mother's Day date and plant it earlier, are the hardy greens. Spinach, arugula, things that you'll find called braising mixes, which will often be a variety of Japanese greens and kales. This is a I'll pass this around. This is a greens mix. It has some bok choy, some mustard greens, some broccoli rabe, and some mizuna. I'll pass that around. You can open it up and look into it. With these, you are planting rows. You'll dig a furrow, and you'll sprinkle the seeds along that furrow. And you'll see the seeds are very tiny.
Wow.
And you'll want a few every inch, you know, so sort of about that density. It's hard to explain exactly how. You'll see it, you know, and as you grow them, you'll know what's too thin and what's too thick. But you'll sow them in a row. Plants will grow, and then when the leaves are still very small, let's see here. You'll have a plant come up and it'll start putting out leaves. And you'll come through and you'll have a row of these. When the leaves are about that large, you know, like the size of baby spinach that you would buy in the grocery store, you can come through with a pair of scissors and you can sort of clip them off right about here. Clipping off the stems of the leaves, not the stems of the plant. If you cut down too low, you're just cutting the plant out of the ground and it won't return, it won't grow back. If you just snip off the leaves where the leaves are, it will continue from the center of the plant to put out more leaves. And when they're that big, you can harvest them again. And you can get 3, maybe 4 cuttings out of a single planting of spinach or arugula or greens. Is that clear? It's kind of hard to explain without actually showing you, doing it for you.
You can plant those after Mother's Day or just before?
You can plant them after Mother's Day. Especially spinach, arugula, are very cold hardy, and they will tolerate cold weather. They won't really tolerate a frost. And so if there's a threat of a frost, you may want to cover them, which brings me to sort of the interesting, tricky part of growing salad greens is frost protection. You can actually extend your season in 2 directions by using frost protection. At the farm, we do that with a product called Rime. That's a brand name of a spun polyester fiber that's woven into large sheets. It is, light will pass through it, rain will pass through it, but it gives you a couple degrees of frost protection. You can find it in catalogs such as Johnny's. You could probably even do an online search for Rime. You'll have your bed, and you'll have your greens sown in the bed. And then you can take, for example, wire, maybe a 4-foot long piece of wire, bend it into an arch, sort of make a little tent for your vegetable bed, 3-4 feet apart. And then you can take this Rime and drape it over top of those wickets. There'll be room for the plants to grow, and you're going to create a microclimate in your garden that will be just warm enough to prevent those plants from freezing. And it will allow you to plant those out before Mother's Day. So last week when it was warm, we put in a bed of spinach and arugula with the idea of putting frost protection over it once they germinate and having greens. You can have greens in 20 days. Some of them are very growing, very fast growing. So,
Are the ends closed?
yes, these ends are closed, the sides are closed, and then you're going to weight it down because it will blow around. You can just get some big rocks, anchor it down. You could lay down a 2x4. So
What's it called again?
it's called Rime. Do I have that name down on the?
Yes, you do.
Yes, Reemay. Under Hearty Greens. So, and frost protection is a whole, extending the season is a whole area for you to explore in terms of planting hardy vegetables, and even not so hardy vegetables. You could put early tomatoes out. You could put tomatoes out a couple weeks before Memorial Day, cover them with remay, cover them with, some people will cut off the tops of 2-liter bottles and use those as little mini greenhouses to put over their tomato plants. And you can sort of trick the plants into thinking that it's warmer than it is, actually make it warmer than it is. Plant things out earlier. In the fall, you can cover them up when there's threat of frost, and you can harvest them later, and you can have your gardening season be longer and have fresh food on your plate much longer than would be normal. So, any questions about? Yes?
Grand Rapids lettuce, do you know? I mean, I know it's a type of lettuce, but I mean, what?
The history behind it?
Something else?
I should know the history behind
Is
that.
there something-
It's a variety of lettuce that was developed in this area. It's a green, loose leaf lettuce. So,
Well, I saw it in the store and I kind of laughed.
yeah, it's a very good lettuce. So, you've eaten it. If you've had a share at the farm, you've eaten it. So,
I bought some seeds.
any other questions about hardy greens or frost protection? All right, finally, I'm going to talk about perennial herbs. These are chives, for example. Other good ones are oregano and thyme. And these are sort of a different category in that you'll really want to wait to plant these the first time until mid to late spring. Because as transplants, they're still a little tender. But once you have planted them, and you do want to plant them in the spring, but once they're established, have had a good growing season, they will return year after year.
Almost invasive.
Some of them are invasive. In my garden at home, I have oregano and I have thyme, and I have chives sprouting right now. My chives are about that tall. And that is something you plant later, but once it's established, you can harvest earlier, and you can be eating fresh herbs right now once you have them established. Again, you want to start with healthy plants from a local nursery. Is just the easiest way to do it. Plant them the same way you would plant any transplant. 12 to 18 inches apart is a good spacing. Depending on the plant, some of them will get larger, some of them will, over time, will get more, as they get more established, will return larger and larger. Sometimes they'll get too large and you'll have to divide them, or you get to divide them and you get to share the plants with your neighbors and your friends. And in the spring, give them their own herb plants to plant out in their garden.
My friends are getting tired of me showing up with stuff to give them.
That's always the danger, right?
Say no, I don't want any before I even show up.
So yeah, so those are some of the things that you can be planting now before Memorial Day. Once Memorial Day hits, you're going to want to be out there with your basil and your tomatoes and your peppers and your eggplant and your summer squash and your winter squash and all sorts of other varieties. But you don't have to wait till then to get your hands dirty. So, and at Trillium Haven, we always like to connect cooking with farming. It's important that the community of growers is connected with the community of cookers and eaters, and that we're always interested in having people cook, learn how to cook new things. And so on the back, I've put a couple recipes that will utilize many of the things we've talked about. Pasta primavera, pasta for the spring, which is a great way to use spring vegetables. And you can substitute many other different kinds of vegetables for the ones there. You could use asparagus. You could use, what else grows in the spring? You can use broccoli. Any kind of greens. And then the frittata. The frittata is a fast, easy way to cook with vegetables, just an open-faced omelet baked in the oven. And it's a delicious way to use, especially fresh herbs, you know, to be able to go out to your garden right now and harvest some herbs and make a fresh meal in your kitchen tonight. So let's open it up for any other questions that anyone has. Yes?
2 questions on the chives. How, I've got some wild chives right now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I could eat them. They were there in-house when we bought the place. I guess there's no danger. We're not putting any herbicides or pesticides on
Mhm.
it, right? Okay, so how far can I chop them? And
Yeah.
I could use, like a plant like that, I can use the whole thing.
With chives, you can go, depending on how large the clump is, you want to trim them about 1 inch above the soil.
Okay.
And then they'll continue to grow back from that.
Okay.
So
Does that help them as well? Does it make them forward?
it does, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
it will. And with chives too, see on the label here that they, you know, after point, chives produce flowers, these lovely little purple flowers. Those flowers are also edible, so they have chive flavor and they're great to use as garnishes.
So you could throw those in. I've got a place where hostas thrive. They don't have to have full sun, right? They've got, because they're kind of growing up underneath the tree.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They will tolerate shade. They'll do best in full sun. Any vegetable will do best in full sun. Some of them, some of the herbs, some of the leafy greens will tolerate shade. Anything that produces fruit or roots really is going to want full sun to do its best.
Another question is a friend of ours has got thyme in the dirt between the rocks, like the stepping stones
Oh, yeah.
in the garden and stuff like that. Is that? It seems like it works. I mean, is that?
Yeah, there are many different varieties of thyme. There's sort of the classic thyme, low-growing creeping thyme, lemon thyme. I think there's some cinnamon thyme. There's just many different varieties. So, and it is great to grow in the cracks of paving stones and becomes this fragrant walkway. Yeah.
Do you grow lavender?
We do grow lavender.
What kind do you?
We grow Munstead lavender, which is a pretty common variety. Lavender can be tricky, I've learned. Lavender is almost a tender perennial around here. It will almost always come back, but in some locations and in some winters it may not. Yes, sir.
For a number of years, I've heard people talk about the time to plant peas is Good Friday. Is there any legitimacy in that?
Well, Good Friday can, I'm not sure I would follow that. I've heard you must have your peas in by St. Patrick's Day, which seems immensely early. So I like the Forsythia rule of thumb because that's based on actual weather conditions, you know, that when you see nature doing this, then you know it's a prompt for you to do something in your garden.
And that's so plant peas when the forsythias blossom,
That's an old rule of thumb, yeah. So,
which they're blossoming right now.
yeah. So, and apparently that's an indication of soil temperature, which is an indication of when your seeds will germinate. The danger is that if the soil is too cold and you plant your peas, they'll just sit, they'll sit there, they'll be fine, and they're gonna wait till the soil to warm up. But if you have a really rainy spring, they will rot in the ground before they have a chance to germinate. And that's just disappointing when that happens. Hmm? That's a good question. Frozen peas, right?
In the way nature does things, I guess the zones have something to do with it, but they'll seed themselves, they'll bolt, they'll seed themselves, they'll drop their seeds, they'll go through the winter, and then the seeds will germinate come spring.
Mm-hmm.
Does that hold true, or can it hold true with all the crops around here, or not? Or what's the story there?
It can hold true.
Depending if it's too wet a season, when it's cold and rotten
Mhm.
seeds, like you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you have a pea plant, and it goes to seed and drops all its seed, then come the following spring, they may grow.
They may grow, yeah.
So which says that potentially, you could plant your garden in the fall.
You could. That you're leaving an awful lot up to chance
Sure.
doing that. So,
Be interesting.
but yeah, and I mean, vegetables often don't make great weeds, which is why we have to eradicate weeds, so-called weeds, from our gardens. Some do. Mustard greens will self-seed and volunteer pretty prolifically. I've seen peas do that. Tomato plants will do that.
I've seen beans and peas.
Tomatillos will do that, but yeah, it'd be an interesting experiment to
Yeah,
do
it
that.
would be. Plant the whole garden in the fall, see what happens.
I'm not real limited on space from a sunshine standpoint, because I've got lots of big oak trees, but I've got one area that's got some ground cover right now that the previous tenants had. And I thought it would be great if I could put strawberries there. But I don't know if strawberries would, after June, strawberries would be a nice looking ground cover, because it's kind of under a window. Does that work, something like that? I've never heard of that.
It could work, depending on the variety. The strawberry patch can look kind of shaggy at a certain point. So, and for a lot of things, when we talk about full sun, what does full sun mean? It means 6 hours of sunlight. For most everything, you want to have 6 hours of sunlight in your garden. It doesn't have to be all at once. You could have 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening, but
Michigan only gets 4.5 hours of sunlight a day on average. That's from the solar energy.
right. All right, very good. Thank you so much for your attention. I was delighted to be here. I hope it was helpful.
Thanks,
So,
Greg.
yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now,